Hello, class. I wanted to do a wrap up from assignment one. That is taking a look at many of the solutions that were presented, and while they present as solutions in the literature, and they often are, I wanted to bring a little bit of a practical flavor to them. In addition to that, discuss a little bit about week 6 and the decision effective, or rather, the decision making effectiveness of for Deidre, now that you are going to find yourself as her supervisor and not as a member of the team, evaluating whether or not she made some good decisions. So I'm going to be referring a little bit to some of my notes here. The assignment, one of the things that I think it's important for everybody to understand is how important it is to be gathering screen fail data. I've been worked in a number of companies and sort of helped out a number of teams. I've never done this with one of my own teams, but there was always a question as to whether or not screen fail data and the collection of it is important. Oftentimes they keep that at the site, and it saves a little bit of money because you don't have to enter any of that data. It doesn't necessarily have to be monitored if it's not being entered into the ECRF. But if you reach a point where it's important to understand exactly why you have the number of screen fails that you do, that data is, while it could be available, it's being captured in source. It's only available at each site. So somebody would have to actually go out to the sites and collect all of that data and send it in. And so that process by itself will add a significant amount of time to trying to understand exactly why the reasons for screen fails. So getting back to my original point, I always think that it's very important to be collecting that screen fail data. Translations. One of the popular solutions was translating the ICF to expand the population that could be eligible for the study. And of course, the reason that you would want to be translating most popular language to be translating into is indeed obviously Spanish. And the reason that you would want to be doing that is because you have a population that exists at sites that don't understand English well enough to be able to read and comprehend exactly what they're being consented into. So that needs to be translated. Now, one of the important things to keep in mind is that if you translate, if a subject can only read the ICF and understand what they're being consented into the Spanish language, you have to have someone at the site that understands English, or rather Spanish, well enough to be able to consent that subject. In addition, if your study has any sort of tools that, let's say, questionnaires that a subject is going to need to complete, those not only need to be translated, but they also have to be validated. And the difference is that a translation is just simply somebody going from word to word, and fairly easy to do. The validation process is a little bit more complicated, and that it takes longer and it's more expensive, because not only does everything need to be translated, but the meaning, it needs to be assured that the meaning of the original questions is also carried over into the questionnaire and into the Spanish language. Like I said, that takes longer and it is more expensive. When you're asking to have translations done, this is a separate point. Always keep in mind that not only do you have to have it translated from English to Spanish, but then it has to be back translated by a separate translator. That's an ideal situation. I've been in plenty of situations where it wasn't considered necessary, but ideally that's what you would like to do, to ensure that then the two English versions are then compared to ensure that there is that they are identical. Again, this takes additional time and additional money, and but necessary. So if you find yourself in a situation where somebody is requesting a Spanish translation, or any language for that matter, one of the questions that I always ask is this a situation where you have a significant number of subjects at your site, potential subjects at your site, that only speak Spanish and cannot be consented in English? The one of the studies that I just helped out on not 6 months ago, that question was brought up. Well, initially when the request was made, the study team, of which I was only consulting on, started moving forward, and there was a whole lot of work that was going forward. And then they began to hit a roadblock because they couldn't find a Spanish version of one of the questionnaires that was part of the study. So then I went back and I said, has anybody actually asked this investigator whether or not it's absolutely necessary? They may have Spanish-speaking individuals at their site, but it may not be necessary, or there are so few Spanish-speaking potential subjects that it's simply not worth the effort to do so. So keep that in mind when that's proposed a solution. Reducing the ICF reading level from, say, 11 down to 8 or even 6th grade, it's not all that easy to do so. It's not as simple as simply changing a few words. So when I've tried this in the past, and the last time I tried to do this was many years ago, it turned out to be a significantly complicated process. And in those years, it may have changed, but keep in mind that it may turn out to be more complicated than it seems. Usually it's the payment process, because somebody doesn't, a company that actually does that sort of work, because having that skill in-house is, I've never seen anyone with the skill to legitimately reduce the reading level. They will want, you can't use the language in that consent that's been reduced, the reading level has been reduced. You can't use that for other consents. Otherwise, the company would just simply do one, and they probably would never they wouldn't make any money. So they tie the contract to do the one and prevent you from ever using it again. Like I said, it got complicated very fast, and the whole idea was chucked into the bin. Changing the inclusion-exclusion criteria. This can get a little bit messy. And along with trying to change the protocol design, that's even more complicated. But these are two things that are not taken lightly. There was a time where I saw protocols that would have 6, 7 amendments, and that's just, to me, I can't help but think that it was probably a protocol that was not well thought out at the very beginning, if you have to make that many amendments, if that many amendments have to be implemented. Usually there are very good reasons why the inclusion-exclusion criteria are set or were established as to where they were. It's certainly not unheard of. Changing the protocol design, that, in my opinion, if it comes to that point, the existing study will probably have to just be, again, completely dismantled, and you'll have to end up starting over again. So that's not something that is taken very lightly. Advertising, speak with your sites to see what works and what doesn't work, and then decide whether or not you want to actually go down some of the roads that they may take you down, because it's going to be more expensive than probably that you may be ready for. Newspapers and flyers usually aren't effective, so you're just throwing money away if that's the route you may be going down. But there may be areas of the country where they are, and so it's worth looking into. Most of the time, it's going to be television, and of course, social media, which is very affordable, can be the most effective ways of doing that. But again, have that discussion with your sites that have done this before, and see what has worked for them in the past. Usually, what I've done is I'll give them, say, enough money for one run. I don't know what it might be. Say, let's just pick a round number of $5,000. And if it proves to be effective, you have to ask that they track the subjects that actually come in and are randomized from the advertising. And if it proves to be effective, and you have to establish what that number may be, let's say it's 3, 4 subjects that are randomized as a result of the ad that's being placed, go with another $5,000. That's the whole point of advertising, and going along with something that has been effective. Something else that was brought up that has been very effective for me in the past is in some of these more rural areas, especially in say Eastern European countries, providing a stipend for travel. If they live some distance away from the site, but they're willing to come in and spend the time, but they don't want to spend, say, the gas money, or they may not have any transportation at all. Providing a stipend to bring them in, say with a taxi or whatever it may be, is proved to be very effective for me as well. Tracking the data. So once you put forth a plan, it's very important to have. I typically will have two graphs, two separate types of graphs. One with the original, one that will have the original timelines, and then the newly established timelines, and then a second graph that will have the newly established timelines that I'm now being measured against, which is now my new forecast, and then a method of being able to apply the actual enrollment. In this case, it's enrollment. It could be expenditures, but we're talking about enrollment, and track the enrollment against that forecast. So you will have, if you need additional sites to be activated, you can have a graph for proposed activation and then actual activation. Same thing with screenings and randomizations. As I mentioned to you all earlier in the semester, still 60-65% of project managers are using Excel spreadsheets to try to track this information, which just boggles my mind because they may as well be using slide rules. But because I'm sure if you were to ask everywhere, it's because of expense. The companies do not choose to implement software and algorithms, which cost money, to more accurately predict how enrollment is going to go, and then be able to collect that data, which could easily be laid over your forecast. If anyone wants a little bit more detail to some of the things that I've seen that have been extremely effective, I'm happy to discuss. You can see I'm here on Mondays. You can email me and we can set up a time to talk. Mondays, I think 10 to 11. Yeah, that's my office hour. I'm happy to spend a little bit of time talking to it. So if you have an opportunity to have any influence, so whether or not the company should stay with Excel spreadsheets, if that's the route that they're currently going, versus a CTMS, I would definitely go with the CTMS. But like all things, that needs to be examined and thought through. So something else, if you find yourself having to present to upper management, remember that the things that they're always going to be looking for is how much is it going to cost. Always give them options. How much resources is it going to take? In other words, is it going to be additional people? And how long is it going to take? How much time is it going to shave off? How long is it going to take for each one of these new ideas to actually be implemented? And how long do you think it's going to take to see some of these ideas result in a change in the enrollment curve? The slides, keep in mind, for the most part, you all did a great job with the slides. Occasionally, some of them got a little busy. Keep the slides clean. Keep the formatting clean, consistent. Look for misspellings. Misspellings can be, it's like it can really ruin an otherwise very nice slide with great information, because there is not a whole lot of information on there. Hopefully you only have bullet points and then you're able to speak to it. And it's like having, I don't know, a piece of spinach on a beautiful smile. And when you are speaking to them, try not to speak as if you've memorized your speech. If you want to learn how to really give a great presentation, I would suggest going on to and looking at TED Talks. I'm sure that you all have done this in the past. There are probably thousands of TED Talks out there now, and so pick a topic that you know about and watch different presenters provide the information. People with passion, they'll grab you even if it'll make up for sometimes for the weakness in some of the information, but speak to them. Have almost a conversation with your audience, and they will listen. You can have great slides, but if you speak to them in a monotone, you will lose them. All right, so let's move on to week 6. And so, as I'm sure that you all know by now, you are in a supervisorial role over and looking at Deidre, and now you have to figure out what to do with it. So, in this post, you'll be there'll be 6 things that you'll be looking at, and you'll have to indicate whether or not she did these things well and what she should be improving upon. Establishing a positive decision-making environment, generating potential solutions, and you all can read the rest of them. They're clearly laid out. And then after that, you have to at least identify 2 elements to improve the effectiveness in the decision-making process for the Patriot team. Have that little exchange at least with 3 other students. Remember to answer all of the questions that come back to you. That's what the exchange part of it's for, and all will go well. So, any questions? As always, reach out to me. You can text me. Please identify yourself when you're texting, because sometimes I get a text and I'm not quite sure what it means, and then after a little bit of going back and forth, I realize that it's actually one of you guys. So if you need to, you can always call me. Otherwise, we'll see you on the discussion board. Thanks.